Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever looked at the White House or the U.S. Capitol and just felt this overwhelming sense of timeless permanence? I mean, they are two of the most recognized, most photographed buildings on the planet. But here's the crazy part. Both of these grand, iconic structures were built entirely from scratch in what used to be literally just muddy farmland and dense forest. So how exactly do you take a wild patch of woods and turn it into the nerve center of a brand new nation? Well, that is the absolutely fascinating story we're diving into today. To get a sense of how this all unfolded, let's take a quick look at the chronological roadmap. As you'll see, these national symbols didn't just pop up overnight. It was a grueling, multi-generational journey that started with a political handshake back in 1790, moved through some incredibly ambitious planning and literal heavy lifting in the 1790s, miraculously survived a catastrophic fire in 1814, and didn't even get its crowning architectural achievement until 1866. Section 1, Choosing a Capital. The Compromise of 1790. So, picture this. It's the early 1790s, and the young United States has a pretty massive problem. They didn't actually have a permanent capital city. Lawmakers were locked in these intense, heated debates over where to set up shop, bouncing around temporary spots like New York and Philadelphia. Finally, a huge political compromise in 1790 broke the deadlock. You essentially had two deeply divided factions. The northern states were practically begging the federal government to assume the massive state war debts from the Revolution. On the flip side, the southern states really wanted the permanent capital located in their own backyard, specifically along the Potomac River. So they struck a deal. The Compromise of 1790 gave both sides exactly what they wanted. The North got their debt relief, and the South got the capital. This brilliant piece of deal-making is what allowed President George Washington to personally ride out and select the exact site that would eventually become Washington, D.C. Section 2, Designing a Grand Vision, Mapping the New City. All right, so the ink is dry on the compromise and the location is picked. But let's be real, a location is just a spot on a map. They needed a vision to turn this rural plot of land into a world-class city. Enter Pierre L'Enfant in 1791. He was a French-born architect and engineer, and let me tell you, this guy did not think small. He designed a breathtakingly ambitious layout. He totally rejected a basic grid system and instead envisioned wide, sweeping avenues, massive public spaces, and these really prominent elevated locations specifically reserved for the Capitol building and the president's house. He was essentially designing a capital meant to rival the greatest cities of Europe. But, you know, brilliant visionaries aren't always the easiest politicians. L'Enfant got into some pretty serious, heated disputes with the local city commissioners, and ultimately he was dismissed from the project. But luckily, the brilliance of his design wasn't lost. The layout was actually saved and continued by a surveyor named Andrew Ellicott. Ellicott, along with his team, meticulously preserved L'Enfant's grand plan and used it to guide the actual plotting of the city streets. Section 3, Building the President's House, from blueprints to scaffolding. With the map finally drawn, it was time to start putting shovels in the ground. Construction on the president's house officially kicked off in 1792. But since L'Enfant was out, who actually designed the building? Well, the government decided to hold a design competition, and the winner was an Irish-born architect named James Hoban. It was Hoban's blueprints that would eventually rise from the mud to become the world-famous structure we know today as the White House. Of course, an architect only draws the plans, right? Somebody actually has to lift the heavy stone and saw the timber, and it is so important to look at who those builders actually were. Factual historical records show that enslaved laborers working right alongside free workers physically built these massive structures. They were out there toiling in incredibly humid, swampy conditions to turn Hoban's blueprints into a reality. This is a vital piece of the historical record, and it's a reality that's fully acknowledged today by historical institutions, like the White House Historical Association. Now, the work was agonizingly slow. By the year 1800, that's 8 whole years after construction began, President John Adams became the very first president to move in, but try to picture this. He was not moving into some polished, finished mansion. When Adams arrived, the scaffolding was literally still up. The construction wasn't even close to being fully complete. He was essentially living in an active, dusty, drafty construction zone. Section 4, Constructing the U.S. Capitol, a home for Congress. Meanwhile, just down one of L'Enfant's grand new avenues, work was well underway on the other prominent building in the city plan, the U.S. Capitol, which had broken ground back in 1793. And the design process for the Capitol followed the exact same playbook as the White House, another design competition.
But the winner this time is honestly pretty surprising. The winning design came from a man named William Thornton. And get this, he wasn't a world-renowned builder. He was actually a physician and just an amateur architect. Yet his vision completely captured the imagination of the young republic.
And this next part really brilliantly illustrates the frantic pacing of the era. Just like the situation with the president's house, the lawmakers simply couldn't wait for perfection. In 1800, Congress met for the very first time in their new home. And yep, just like John Adams, they were meeting in a partially finished, incomplete Capitol building. The government was officially open for business, even if the paint was literally still wet. Section 5. Fire, Rebuilding, and Today. The War of 1812 and beyond. So the government had finally moved in, and the new capital was slowly, finally taking shape. But this brand new city was about to face a massive, fiery setback just over a decade later. The young nation found itself at war again, this time the War of 1812. And in 1814, complete disaster struck. Advancing British forces stormed into Washington, D.C., and purposefully set fire to both the president's house and the Capitol building. The flames absolutely gutted the structures. The young government's most prized symbols, which they had just spent 2 decades painstakingly building from the mud, were left in total ruins. But the nation pushed forward. They didn't abandon the city. Instead, they doubled down and began rebuilding. James Hoban, the original architect of the White House, actually came back to oversee the reconstruction of the president's house. And over at the Capitol, the building wasn't just rebuilt, it was continuously expanded and renovated time and time again over the next 2 centuries to fit a rapidly growing Congress. In fact, that massive, iconic cast iron dome that we all instantly recognize today, that wasn't even part of the original construction. It wasn't completely finished until 1866. So the really crucial takeaway here is that these buildings didn't just magically appear overnight. They are the product of decades of genuine struggle. They stand today as lasting monuments built through a really complex history of political compromise, incredibly ambitious visionary planning, catastrophic damage, and the intense physical labor of both free and enslaved workers. They are a literal, physical representation of this nation's highly complex early foundations. These grand buildings were meticulously planned and constructed to govern a brand new nation that was just hugging the eastern seaboard. But it really makes you wonder, what happens to a capital city and the government sitting inside those walls when that very same nation unexpectedly doubles its total landmass in an absolute flash? Well, that is exactly what we'll be exploring next time when we dive into the wild story of the Louisiana Purchase. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and thank you so much for joining me for this